contain such a terrifying amount of sinister power. Before Andrina could react, the bone spear-turned monster swallowed the crystal ball of Andrina's with its enormous mouth, and it started chewing. Crack! Crack! It sounded as though the energy crystal projectile that was harder than diamond was being broken down into pieces. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh! The 7 bone spurs whistled and surrounded Andrina in an instant. They emanate a frigid and insidious energy. This made Andrina even more shocked. She immediately turned her attention to the 7 bone spurs that had her surrounded and gave up on the crystal ball, which was devoured. A most luminous light burst from Andrina's chest, quickly transforming her body into sparkling and translucent, living crystal. Quickly after that, a blinding light emanated from her. It was so luminous that even the structure of spacetime was altered by it. The 7 bone spurs that had surrounded Andrina could only dither back and forth as they could not lock onto her location. "Who are you? Why does your aura seem so familiar?" shouted the crystallized Andrina with the same ice-gold face while glaring at Han Hao, who had the bone spear back in his hand. Han Hao was never talkative when fighting. Without even acknowledging the question, he charged at Andrina. As he moved, he violently flung his enlarged bone spear about, causing hundreds of thumb-sized energy crystals to fall off the bone spear. Those energy crystals were devoid of all energy, and they had become the most ordinary rock. When the crystal ball was devoured by the bone spear, it was cut off from Andrina, its power source. After the energy inside the crystal divine weapon was exhausted by Han Hao's energy, with nothing to replenish its energy, it crumbled and was destroyed. "Identify yourself. I don't want to hurt the wrong person," shouted Andrina again when she saw that Han Hao ignored her question and charged at her. Han Hao remained silent. He hurled the bone spear in his hand forward. The bone spurs that flew out of Han Hao's back were unable to lock onto Andrina and attack her. The bone spear that trapped thousands of tormented souls, however, seemed to be immune to the luminous light. It pierced through the layers of shields made of light and went straight for Andrina's chest. Andrina's face yet again jolted. The blinding light shield all around her suddenly vanished as she took out a beautiful astrarium that had various constellations and stars etched on it. It flew out as though it had a mind of its own. Ting! The astrarium shot forward to intercept the bone spear. Upon contact, a most bizarre energy surged into the bone spear. Those tormented souls located at the tip of the bone spear were annihilated into puffs of faint gray smoke. Han Hao's eyes glistened. Without thinking, he raised a hand and took back his bone spear. He decided to activate the energy of the quintessence shard and demonic art. He was going all in. Han Hao sensed that the astrarium contained the energy of destiny. He had rarely encountered experts cultivating in this energy. He knew that the Edict of Destiny was the most abstruse and mysterious of the 12 fundamental forces. The energy on the astrarium was also extremely formidable, far too much for those tormented souls in his bone spear to withstand. After making up his mind, Han Hao took back his bone spear and charged at Andrina without hesitation. This main body of his was extremely tough. He had spent way more time and effort enhancing his body than on his bone spear. And recently, his body had successfully incorporated a quintessence shard of death. It could even be said that the most terrifying weapon Han Hao had was his body. Andrina could tell that Han Hao was going all in. All of Han Hao's previous attacks were through ranged weapons, and he wore a very calm expression, almost as though she wasn't taken as a threat. But Han Hao now wore a grave expression, and he was obviously much more concentrated. The formidable power that Han Hao had revealed so far made Andrina feel threatened and distressed. If not for the astrarium that her mother had given her, she would have been injured by the bone spear just then. Therefore, Andrina was getting worried when she saw that Han Hao was going all in. "Who are you to Brian?" she suddenly shouted when Han Hao was just meters away from her. Han Hao, whose mind was concentrated on killing his enemy, was startled. He halted just a dozen-something meters before Andrina, sized her up with a rather puzzled look, and asked, "Who are you? How did you know my father?" Andrina was astonished, and she exclaimed, "What? You are his son? How is this possible?" Han Hao slowly descended to the ground, looked at Andrina calmly, and asked, "Are you his friend or his foe?" "Friend, of course. I used to be his bodyguard. I happen to be looking for him. Why don't you bring me to him?" answered Andrina in a giggling smile. Han Hao did not immediately reply but stared at her attentively as though judging if Andrina was telling the truth. After a while, Han Hao replied, "I'm busy. My father is at the pandemonium of the fringe. You can go look for him yourself." Upon finishing those words, Han Hao turned and left without even giving Andrina another look. He could sense that Nestor was rushing to this spot at full speed, and he must not linger in the area any longer. Although Han Hao was returning to the fringe, he must take a detour to avoid running into the overgod of death. Therefore, he cannot travel with Andrina. Before Andrina could say anything, Han Hao had vanished into the distance. She pouted and complained, "What a jerk! I know where the fringe is, and I know how to get there myself." Andrina continued to gaze in the direction Han Hao left with her eyes that were glistening with strange lights. She mumbled to herself, "The energy that this fella deliberately released is clearly from the quintessence shard of death, and he did not use his full strength just then. I heard that Nestor has gone to the fringe. Could it be that Nestor is after this fella?" After thinking for a moment, she grumbled, "If it wasn't for Brian, I would definitely be going to tell Uncle Nestor about you." Andrina made a face and let out a humph in the direction Han Hao left before she headed in the direction of the fringe. In the Destiny Goddess Shine, the goddess of destiny's figure gradually took shape and appeared in the shine. "Andrina, I've brought you something, it's your favorite crystal." A benevolent, graceful, and melodious voice sounded through the shine. After a long while, the goddess shook her head and laughed. She said to herself, "I guess I should have known this girl could never stay put, but I think she wouldn't venture too far this time. She would be quite safe with her new power." The goddess cast her gaze to the fringe. Her eyes looked as though a pair of astrarium with constellations of stars slowly revolving. It was as though she was an extremely complicated automaton instead of a living being with flesh and blood. "Oh, Han Shuo, I hope you could unseal Eternia with the energy he had left you," murmured the goddess as she gazed at the land of chaos. Over at the pandemonium, Han Shuo, who was in secluded cultivation, suddenly had an uneasy feeling. He couldn't help himself but exited his gymnasium, flew above the pandemonium, and gazed in the direction of the Destiny Dominion. He mumbled, "Could it be that Han Hao met an accident over there?" Han Shuo always trusted the senses of his soul. He started weighing if he should head to the Destiny Dominion to have a look. "My lord, I have news." It was at this moment that Zavik came to him and reported to him respectfully. Han Shuo smiled and asked, "Is it from the Omphalos?" Zavik nodded and replied, "There was a small mishap, but things ended exactly as your lordship has predicted. The overgod of death did not attack young Master Han Hao. He had left the Omphalos and most likely had left the fringe." Zavik gave Han Shu a quick summary before he explained everything in detail. The temptation of the quintessence shard was so great that it had destroyed every bit of rationality in Dagmar, drove him to do something as foolish as intruding into the Omphalos. If it wasn't for Tyre and Log's deliberate stalling, Dagmar would have died in there. Even though Han Shu wasn't anywhere near the Omphalos when it happened, he easily figured out the truth from Zavik's recount. Many of Dagmar's most powerful followers had their divine bodies destroyed. Even though Dagmar escapes with their divine souls, there is still a long way to go for them to regain their original strengths. After this incident, Dagmar is no longer a threat, remarked Zavik smilingly. Never ever underestimate a man who has gone insane. Instead of being as optimistic as Zavik, Han Shuo gravely instructed, "Pay special attention to Dagmar. An overgod who has lost his rationality could do things that we cannot foresee. Tell everyone to not leave the pandemonium for now." "Understood," answered Zavik solemnly. "All right. You are dismissed." Han Shuo nodded and sent Zavik away. After he left, Han Shuo stared in the direction of the Destiny Dominion with his brows slightly bunched. He mumbled, "If Han Hao is all right, then what was that feeling about? Andrina should be in the Destiny Dominion. Could it be that something happened to Andrina? That makes no sense. No one would dare touch her in the Destiny Dominion." After thinking for a long while, Han Shu still could not come up with any possible scenario. He decided to stop thinking about it and go back to preparing his defenses against the Godhunter Alliance, who will be invading very soon. With the overgod of death now left the fringe, the Godhunter Alliance had no reason to stall their invasion any longer, and his pandemonium would be fiercely attacked. The day after, on a hazy, bald mountain at the outskirts of the fringe, all 12 hegemons of the God Hunter Alliance were gathered on the top of the mountain, with their armies of God Hunters scattered all around them. Those ferocious-looking God Hunters, that numbered in the tens of thousands, had completely occupied the mountain. Although the God Hunter Alliance had existed for eons, this was the first time that all 12 hegemons had gathered. It was also the first time that they attacked any forces on a united front. There, an old man with a compassionate face, wearing the bright white gown of a Church of Light priest, smiled and asked the hegemons for their attention. But he was interrupted before he could begin his speech. "Judas, why are you still wearing that stupid white priest clothing? Haha, don't tell me that you are still wishing to return to the warm embrace of the God of Light," teased Daka as he looked at the hegemon of Light with a mocking expression. "If he could return to the God of Light, I would have long been summoned back to the Shrine of Ice," sneered Tuckamore, the hegemon of Water. Judas seemed somewhat embarrassed. He put on a grimacing smile and explained, "It was the God of Light who had forsaken me. But deep in my heart, I still hope to serve him. If he could forgive my sins, I might actually return to his side." "Ha ha ha, return to his side? To do what? Backstab him again?" Daka laughed without the slightest scruple. He cupped his hands towards Judas in salutation and remarked, "I have nothing but absolute respect for you, Judas. Not only for the fact that you were once a keeper of the light, but that you are still alive despite having committed such an atrocious act. Truly, you are the most treacherous and strongest among us hegemons." "You are flattering me," said Judas humbly. He then turned and bowed towards an empty space and piously said, "Praise be to God of Light. I will strive to live for as long as possible, till the day the quintessence leaves your body." "That's enough. I have no interest in listening to your prattles. Let's get moving already," said Dagmar in an annoyed manner after letting out a cold groan from his white bone throne. "Oh, Dagmar, Judas may be the strongest, but you are without a doubt the most heroic among us. To infiltrate and strike at the center of the fringe all by yourself, that is indeed a boost to our morale. Haha, if we win this war, you would be all thanks to this meritorious deed of yours," said Regis, the hegemon of Thunder in a mischievous smirk. He added, "However, it would have been even more admirable if you had killed Tyre, Log, and the other sovereigns instead of running from them. Then we can just swoop in and pick up the pieces. Don't you think? Regis, you wanna fight?" Dagmar's face turned dark and he challenged Regis. "I have defeated you 400 years ago and I can do it again today. Let's see about that." Regis grinned and stood up. It appeared that he really wanted to duel Dagmar. Throughout its existence, the God Hunter Alliance had been fractured mostly because of the hostility between the hegemons. They would mock and ridicule each other and add salt to each other's injury. "Hold up, not now. Let's destroy those in the fringe first. After we defeat our enemy, you may fight as much as you want," said Judas smilingly. He raised his voice and said, "All right, let's all get back to business. Now, how do we split the forces? I'm taking down Brian." Dagmar let out another groan and leaned back on his throne. He had suffered enormous losses in the Omphalos, but had failed to obtain the quintessence shard from Han Hao. He was determined to force Han Hao to reveal the location of the shard and kill him. Unlike the Overgod of Death, Dagmar had seen Han Hao use the quintessence shard with his own eyes. Therefore, even though Dagmar couldn't find the shard on Han Hao back in the Omphalos, he still had his eyes fixed on Han Hao. He will never stop until he obtains the shard and kills Han Hao. "Acer and I are close to Dagmar. We will join him in attacking Brian and the Pandemonium," said Daka as he cast a glance at Acer. Acer nodded after Daka finished his words. They seemed to have agreed on it earlier. "Really? Do you need 3 hegemons to defeat the House of Han?" asked Tuckamore, the hegemon of Water. He felt that Daka had the least workload and disagreed with the arrangement. The House of Han is very strong. I know that because I have fought Brian before. Besides, Dagmar's strength has now reduced, so it's quite fair that the 3 of us take the Pandemonium together." Daka was replying to Tuckamore's question, but his eyes were on Judas. Judas thought for a moment before he beamed and said, "I think that makes sense. Tuckamore, considering that Dagmar had suffered a misfortune, let them go together." Although Tuckamore had made sarcastic comments about Judas just then, he seemed to still have some respect for him. Tuckamore nodded and said nothing more about it. Chapter 946, The war begins GDK 946. The war begins the meeting of the hegemons steered by Judas, and Daka slowly came to an end. Dagmar, Aser, and Daka, the hegemons of death, darkness, and destruction, will be attacking the house of Han's Pandemonium. Tuckamore and Judas, the hegemons of water and light, will be attacking Log. Regis, Miller, and Isaiah, the hegemons of thunder, wind, and earth, will be attacking Asura. The remaining hegemons would be attacking Tyre and Wasir. It was obvious that the power of the Godhunter alliance was far greater than that of the Fringe. If everything goes well, the 5 sovereigns would be defeated, and the Fringe would fall into the Godhunter alliance's hand. After the meeting was concluded, the 12 hegemons gathered their troops and separated as 5 armies, marching into the land of chaos from 5 directions. The Pandemonium will be facing Daka, Aser, and Dagmar, 3 experts with over-god strengths. Although Dagmar had suffered tremendous losses in his last failed mission, Aser and Daka still possessed an army of experts at the top of their shape. With Salaz, a former sovereign who knew his way around the Fringe working as their guide, it seemed as though the Pandemonium was destined to fall. With Salaz showing the way, the 3 hegemons started marching towards the Pandemonium. After a while, Salaz suddenly spoke, "There are all kinds of powerful boundaries protecting the Pandemonium. The valley is shrouded all year by extremely toxic fog. It's very hard to deal with. Back then, I suffered tremendous losses when I attacked the Pandemonium, even though Brian was not around at that time. I could not even lay waste to the valley. The real battle will begin soon, and it was important that they know as much as possible about their enemy and the ground situation." Salaz informed the 3 hegemons everything he knew about the Pandemonium in detail. Daka and Aser listened intently to his briefing. Dagmar, however, was absent-minded. His viper-like eyes glistened with insidious rays. Before Salaz had completed giving his briefing, Dagmar suddenly interrupted. "Salaz, it's just a small little valley. Even if there are 100 times more barriers and seals, are they enough to stop the 4 of us? I'm not sure. But back then, soon after I intruded the valley, I was trapped by a bizarre energy for a long while." Salaz used to be cautious of Dagmar. However, ever since Dagmar became obsessed with the quintessence shard, Salaz started to scorn him. He thought that Dagmar was no longer a formidable expert after he lost his ability to think rationally. "A bizarre energy?" sneered Dagmar. He glanced at Salaz from the corner of his eyes and derisively said, "Salaz, are you making things up to hide the fact that you were too weak? How in the world can the defenses of a valley trap an over-god expert?" Salaz groaned and put on an annoyed face. He responded, "I'm just telling you what I've experienced. It's completely up to you if you want to believe my words or not, but don't say that I didn't warn you if your followers got massacred. Dagmar, you were there when we fought Brian at the Misty Sea. You should know that his cultivation is not the same as ours. Also, you've known Hanhao long ago and have fought him recently. Hanhao also cultivates an energy that is not known to us, is it not?" said Daka. In a grave expression, he continued, "In this war, not only must we kill Brian, Hanhao, and destroy the Pandemonium, we must also avoid taking too many casualties. As you know, that Judas guy is a cunning fox. If we lose too many of our forces to the House of Han, we will lose out when it's time to divide the spoils. Therefore, we better listen to what Salaz has to say." After hearing Daka's words, Dagmar put on an eerie smile and said, That makes sense." He turned to Salaz and apologetically said, "Please continue, I will listen carefully, hee." Salaz nodded, thought for a moment before he continued, "The Pandemonium is extraordinarily unusual. I'm telling you that lest that you get caught by surprise and suffer heavy losses. Other than that base, from my research, I discovered that there is another base near the Pandemonium. Hanhao's Godhunters are stationed there. Although it is not far away from the Pandemonium, its defenses aren't as tight." Dagmar's body jolted when he heard Hanhao's name mentioned. A sinister spark circled in his eyes before he asked Salaz, "What do you suggest?" "Hanhao is close to the House of Han. As it is not as well defended, I think that we should head to his base first and see if we can destroy it before going to the Pandemonium. Oh, and don't underestimate Hanhao's power. He had united every godhunter in the Fringe. After the 5 sovereigns, he has the largest army. Very well, we will head to Hanhao's base first." Dagmar seemed rather impatient. His main objective wasn't to destroy the pandemonium, but to take Han Hao's quintessence shard. The fringe was nothing in Dagmar's eyes compared to the quintessence shard of death. Salas, you are more familiar with the fringe than we do. Do you think we might run into any trouble? Asked Daka with his brows bunched. Sala's proposal was a deviation from his own plan. But after thinking about it carefully, Daka didn't feel that taking a quick detour would cause any issue. Never in a million years would Daka suspect that Salas had secretly looked for Han Shuo and even reached a deal with him. After all, it was Han Shuo who had ousted Salas from the fringe. From Daka's point of view, Salas and Han Shuo had irreconcilable animosity, and it was impossible for them to team up. He felt that Salas was proposing that in his best effort to destroy the House of Han. I do not know if we might run into troubles, but I'm sure that their defenses won't be as great as the pandemonium. If we can't even defeat that base, then there is no point trying to invade the pandemonium, replied Salas in a deep voice. What do you think? Daka thought for a moment before turning to Acer and asked for his opinion. Sure, why not? We can take down that base as a warm-up and see if we can find Dagmar his shard in passing, answered Acer unenthusiastically, shrugging. Wonderful, hee-hee, exclaimed Dagmar. Acer had just become much more pleasing to his eyes. All right, then we shall head there first. Daka finally agreed to the slight change of plan. They started asking Salas about the situation over on that base as they altered their course. Over at the pandemonium, Zavik, Ramen, Rose, the 5 elite zombies, Balins, and every core member of the House of Han were assembled. Even Strathome, Phoebe, and the others, who had been busy assimilating cultivation memories from their crystal balls, came out from their gymnasiums. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer are heading for us with their Godhunter troops. Other than the 3 hegemons, we might also have to face Salas. Zavik, who was standing beside Han Shuo, explained the situation with a grave look. The atmosphere turned solemn after the House of Han members were briefed. Even the usually carefree Gilbert turned unusually quiet. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were all overgod experts. If Salas was among them, they would be facing 4 overgods. The House of Han had never faced such a mighty force. Compared to the 4, Hill and Sha Tio they had encountered in Witherbone City was absolutely insignificant. That's the situation now. Han Shuo swept his eyes across the crowd and instructed. From today onwards, the pandemonium is sealed. Nobody takes a step outside without my explicit permission. If we do not leave the pandemonium, wouldn't the God-Hunters take a detour and head straight for the Omphalos? Asked the puzzled Iremike. From our agreement with Tyre and the others, is it not our responsibility to guard this side of the fringe? If we allow Daka and the others to go around us and head for the Omphalos, the consequences would be dire. Don't worry, Daka will come to the pandemonium. His objective wasn't to take the Omphalos, but to destroy us, replied Han Shuo with a confident smile. Iremike nodded and did not ask any more questions. He had known Han Shuo for a long time, and he could tell that Han Shuo has a plan in mind. He would have thought of every aspect long ago. Yeah, so don't go out to seek them. Instead, we will wait in the pandemonium and let them come to us. Han Shuo scanned the faces of his family clan members before he smilingly continued. But if they were to go around us and head for the Omphalos, let them be. In any case, our members in the Omphalos should have evacuated by now. Strathome stared blankly for a moment before he suddenly laughed and asked, So you have never bothered about defending the Omphalos? Han Shuo too laughed before he answered, So what if it is destroyed? With Han Tu and Han Jin, rebuilding the Omphalos is a piece of cake. As to those in the Omphalos, well, why should I protect their lives? I couldn't care less if they die. Hee, only those strong enough to survive the slaughter are qualified to be the future servants of my House of Han. After hearing those words, the party immediately understood Han Shuo's real plan. It seemed as though Han Shuo was planning to conquer the entire land of chaos. Brian, about the elixir you promised, how is the progress on that? Strathome's heart was itching. He had an embarrassed smile as he said, I have reached a higher realm state. I will advance to the next level once I have sufficient divine energy. Don't worry about it, the raw materials for your elixir are on their way here. With all those god hunters coming our way, I can produce an endless supply of the divine energy elixir for everyone, answered Han Shuo, before he calmly added a few more instructions, and advised them to be extra cautious. However, Han Shuo did not reveal much about his actual plan. Over at a valley not too far from the pandemonium, silhouettes could be seen weaving above three mountains. They seemed to be busy with something. Standing on a cliff, Han Hao was closely observing the activities happening on the three mountains and those shooting across it. From time to time, he would summon a follower and give some instructions. Enormous sigils with strange shapes were carved onto the three mountains. Nobody knew when it was carven, who did it, or even what they were for. Even Han Hao's followers were completely clueless about it. They merely followed Han Hao's instruction to pour barrels after barrels of a most pungent and dark liquid on those sigils. When the ink-like liquid made contact with the sigils, jet black smoke was produced. However, miraculously, the black smoke doesn't dissipate or move with the wind, but lingers around the sigils. The inside of the mountains was excavated to form countless cavities. When energy crystals were placed into those cavities, the energy crystals would start shining in their unique, beautiful luster and begin releasing their energy, which would flow to every corner of the mountain through special circuits. Under the work of Han Hao and his followers, the atmosphere of the three mountains had drastically transformed. It appeared ghostly, sinister, and dangerous. "Are you okay?" Han Shu suddenly materialized beside Han Hao. He took a look at the wound on his chest and asked, "Zavik told me that you ran into Dagmar in the Omphalos. Did he do anything to you?" Han Hao gestured for his followers around him to keep away temporarily before he answered, "It's fine. This surrogate body is meant to be disposable, after all." After taking a short pause, Han Hao said, "Father, the first to come to my rescue was Wasier." Han Shuo stared blankly for a bit before he smiled and nodded. "Excellent. It seems that Wasier is a reliable person during critical times." Han Shu thought for a moment before he bunched his brows and asked, "Tyre and Log definitely wouldn't have intervened even if they were just nearby." What about Asura? Did you notice anything unusual?" "Asura arrived after Wasier. He seemed to be rushing to me and I can't tell anything wrong, but still, somehow, it just feels as though he was a bit late," answered Han Hao. Okay." Han Shuo thought in silence for a moment before he turned to those busying on the mountains and smilingly remarked, "Salas should be leading them here as we speak. They are going to love the big surprise that I've prepared for them." "Father, do you know a girl named Andrina?" asked Han Hao suddenly. Han Shuo was stunned. He looked at Han Hao with an astounded look and replied, "Yes, I know Andrina. She is a good friend. How did you know about Andrina?" "I have fought her." Seeing that Han Hao was still puzzled, Han Hao added, "I mean, my main body fought her in the Destiny Dominion. She is formidable. She possesses a divine weapon that probably belongs to Destiny Edict Cultivator." Han Hao recounted his encounter with Andrina in detail. After hearing Han Hao's story, Han Shuo kept silent for a moment before he suddenly laughed and said, "She is coming to the fringe to find me. That's wonderful. If she stays in the pandemonium, I believe that even a quintessence overgod would think twice before attacking us." Chapter 947, Payback GDK 947. Payback the Fringe was neither large nor small. Dhaka, Dagmar and Acer spent only around 10 days searching the place with their subordinates to reach Han Hao's abode near the pandemonium. On the way, Dhaka and the rest didn't encounter even half a soul. It was as if the chaos of the fringe had all subsided. It was so calm that it seemed a little imposing. The unnatural calm prompted them to be even more careful and wary. They were in somebody else's turf, after all. Even with their strength, they didn't dare act with abandon, especially when they knew the other side would definitely be lying in hiding and waiting for them. Dhaka, Dagmar, and Acer each scanned different parts of their surroundings with their divine souls to ensure no hidden foe would ambush them. With Salas around, Dhaka and the rest didn't ask much. They kept their thoughts mostly to themselves. Finally, they reached the vicinity of the three mountains. In the distance, Dhaka saw a black fog that brought a certain stench out of the valley. Suspicious, he shot Salas a glance and said, "Salas, are you sure this is the place?" "It should be here," Salas replied solemnly. He found it rather weird himself as his divine soul sweep didn't detect any sign of other souls. What in the world was that guy up to? "There's nobody here at all," Dagmar said. His white bone throne emanated a field of death aura to keep the black miasma from touching his body, while carrying him to the valley between the three mountains. "Let's go take a look," Daka said to Aser before the two of them caught up to Dagmar. There was a pungent, soury smell wherever the black miasma wafted by. It was a clear sign of poison, but Daka and the rest were powerful enough that this wouldn't affect them. Salas didn't follow along and merely watched curiously from afar, observing the details in the surroundings. Having had the experience in Pandemonium, Salas was really wary of anywhere remotely related to Han Shuo. He knew that anywhere Han Shuo had him bring people to was definitely somewhere to beware of, so he didn't dare to be too daring. Without Daka and the other two's orders, their subordinates remained where they were. These godhunter elites from the three divine dominions had been working loyally for the trio for many years. Not only were they strong, they were also well-disciplined and wouldn't act on their own accord without explicit orders. The trio explored the valley and saw nothing but some weird runes on the walls of the mountains. Their senses picked up not a single sign of life. Soon, they returned to Salas. Daka said, "The place should be fine, but it seems like they're all gone. I believe they are aware that we were coming, so Han Hao probably had his forces group up with the House of Han." "That's indeed possible. They are probably well aware that they can only stand a chance against us if they pool their forces," Dagmar said in agreement, but with some impatience in his tone. "I think we can give up on this place and go straight to Pandemonium, right?" Given all that, Salas believed that he had done all he could. The valley was indeed deserted. If he forced the three of them to search the mountains thoroughly, it would only make him look suspicious, so he nodded his agreement without saying anything else. "Let's go to Pandemonium then. I believe that unless they decided to give up their foothold in the fringe entirely, the House of Han would be there," remarked Daka as he prepared to instruct his men to leave. "Wait!" exclaimed Dagmar as he raised a hand. There was an odd flash in his eyes. "What is it?" Daka exclaimed. "Did you notice anything?" He knew that Dagmar was a cultivator of death energy, so his soul-searching skills would be much more proficient than his own. Most faint soul reverberations might escape Daka and Aser's senses, but it would be detected by Dagmar. "There are a few weak soul reverberations in the valley. I felt a pulse or two just now. Let me double-check one last time." A soul energy slowly spread out from Dagmar. It seemed that he was deploying a special technique to detect the weak pulses in the valley. Daka and Aser knew that Dagmar was not his usual self thanks to the quintessence shard. But given he had cultivated death energy to the over-god level, and his usual penchant for not making things up, not to mention his target was Han Hao, he wouldn't lie about it so casually. As expected, Dagmar used his unique sensing method and pointed at the three mountains. "There's no need to leave. There are people within the three mountains, but a kind of special energy was infused in the valley to block our divine soul sweep. Brian is formidable as expected. He almost tricked us with that barrier of his." "How do you know the one who deployed the barrier wasn't Han Hao?" Salas wondered. "He isn't that capable. Back then at Omphalos, I managed to get a good feel for his strength while my subordinates held him back. He's not nearly as powerful as you say he is. Without the quintessence shard, he is a normal high god. I can crush him easily like a bug." "Dagmar, are you sure they are hiding in the mountains?" Daka ascertained once more. "I'm sure. There are people in all three of them," he replied confidently. He took a short pause before he continued. "Daka, Aser, there are three mountains, so each of us will search one of them. There will definitely be many twisting paths within. I'm sure the mere Han Hao wouldn't be able to escape the three of us." He then immediately turned to his subordinates and instructed, "Come with me. The miasma in the valley isn't anything troublesome." "Move," not caring whether the other two hegemons would do as he said, Dagmar charged straight into the valley. After a moment's hesitation, Daka said to Aser, "Let us go too. Dagmar's soul detection is rather decent, and we've worked together many times. He is indeed pretty good on that front." Aser agreed and zoomed towards the valley in the form of a black beam. His subordinates followed along without a hint of hesitation. "What about you, Salas?" Daka asked, not in a hurry to leave. "I'm fine, let's go." Salas shrugged. If he didn't tag along, Daka would definitely be suspicious. He had to join despite knowing the risks involved. "All right, just tag along with me. I can look after you as well," said Daka smilingly, no longer hesitating after hearing a satisfactory answer. He charged in with his subordinates too. When Daka and Salas arrived, Dagmar and Aser had gone quite far in. The two hegemons picked the smaller mountains, leaving the tallest and most intimidating one for Daka. Daka secretly cursed the fact that the other two only wanted to cooperate in name, but wouldn't hesitate to cut corners. Everyone in the Godhunter Alliance was self-centered, and that was something nobody could change. Let's go. He still did what he should. He found a path into the valley that could let in 3 people side by side at once and entered with Salas. Lord, there is a barrier here as you suspected, one of Dagmar's subordinates reported. His voice reverberated and echoed across the network of tunnels and made its way into Dagmar's ears. The moment they entered, they encountered countless branching paths. Thankfully, Dagmar knew that that would be the case and had his subordinates split up to make sure all the paths were searched. The way he saw it, the strongest one in the mountains was Han Hao. When he fought his avatar back at Omphalos, he thought he knew the extent of his power and no longer considered him a worthy foe. He believed that his subordinates alone were enough to take on the mid-stage high god Han Hao. As such, he didn't think twice when he spread his men thin. He wasn't afraid they would be ambushed at all. "I'm coming," Dagmar charged in from another tunnel with utter bliss. There were layers of light within the tight cavern. The first layer was filled with the energy of death, with the following ones being water, fire, and other common energies. The last layer, however, was special. Even Dagmar couldn't quite tell what it was. He gave the barriers a quick feel and without any hesitation began destroying them. Contrary to his expectations, the barriers didn't seem to possess much defensive power. When his bone spear pierced into it, the layers of the barrier crumbled easily. Even the last odd layer fell apart much easily that he'd thought. "Come!" Dagmar shook with anticipation at the thought of Han Hao falling to his godhunters. Chapter 948, Set in Stone, GDK 948. Set in stone, there was an identical barrier a few hundred meters ahead. This time around, Dagmar didn't even hesitate and broke through the grand-looking but ultimately weak barrier, breaking through it to go deeper in the cavernous mountain. Like Dagmar, Daka and Aser encountered similar barriers and dealt with them the same way. Such barriers could be found blocking the way all across the 3 mountains, and they were broken through one after another by the 3 of them as they made their way to the center. Whoa! Outside the valley, one of Daka's subordinates let out a cry of shock as he studied the odd runes on the 3 mountains curiously. Those runes that represented something they didn't know lit up one after another as colored smoke wafted out of them and gathered in the dark clouds around the mountains. It caused the stench to grow stronger than ever. Daka and the rest had left a few subordinates outside the mountains just in case someone would come charging into the mountains after them for a sneak attack. Upon noticing it, their subordinates felt a sense of dread as they continued to observe the slightest change in their environment. "I feel like something's off," Aser's subordinate said, furrowing his brow. "There is some kind of special energy inside the valley that seems to gather around the weird markings on the mountains. Don't tell me it's something bad." "I'll go in to report to our lord," said another as he charged into the cavern Aser had entered. At this moment, weird noises could be heard coming from the mountains as the ground shook fiercely, causing countless cracks to form beneath their feet. The weird power within the mountains congregated around the top of the mountains. Instantly, the light coming from the runes grew to blinding levels. "Something's happening," Daka's subordinate yelled in panic. "You few, inform the lord about this immediately." Dagmar's men reacted the same. They felt some kind of odd energy being released by the mountains. Not only did it affect the terrain around the valley, but it also changed the mountains themselves. The changes happened so rapidly that before Dagmar's subordinates managed to enter the caverns, a loud explosion rang out from the depths of the earth. Wafts of gas came out from the cracks and blended with the black miasma. At the same time, the shaking made the 3 mountains unstable. The one Dagmar went into slanted more and more to one side like a drunk giant. "What's going on?" The 3 hegemons yelled from within their respective mountains. "Danger! Retreat!" Aser yelled. His voice rang loud like thunder through the caverns. They felt the abnormality even clearer than the subordinates they left outside. It felt as though there were terrifying energy reactors within the mountains, continuously filling the mountains with energies. As they continued to shake, rubble started falling from the top. While the god hunters, as godly beings, wouldn't be afraid of mere rocks that fell from the ceiling. That, coupled with the violent shaking of the mountains and the energy the cores at their center unleashed, caused quite a lot of force to be imbued in the falling rocks, making them quite the threat. Not only did the energies make the rocks weigh tons, they even caused them to fall at much faster speeds. With the caverns so narrow and filled with god hunters, most of them could barely avoid the rocks and were rammed by them harshly. Under the bombardment of the rocks that were charged up by the mysterious energy, the god hunters fared no better than mortal humans. Many of them ended up broken and bleeding, with some frantically deploying barriers above their heads in hopes of being able to prevent some damage. It was a shame that the supercharged rocks were so powerful that they easily destabilized the barriers they deployed before crushing them like eggshells. The rocks ricochet around in the caverns and caused huge casualties among the god hunters. Many of them couldn't even lift a finger against the rocks, especially when they were pushing against each other in the tight space like sardines. They only stood a chance if they smashed the rocks with joint attacks. But even then, destroying the rocks would cause them to explode like grenades, sending extremely penetrative shrapnel in every direction and causing them grave injuries. Their retreat paths had collapsed and they were trapped. Therefore, even though they knew that they would be seriously injured, they did everything they could to destroy the rocks. It was their only chance of survival. "Salas, you did this!" Daka roared as he destroyed the rocks that blocked his way. By now, he was well aware that he had fallen into a trap. Although it sounded as though he was suspicious of Salas, he didn't imagine Salas would actually betray them. "How would I know something like this would happen?" "Daka, did you think I wanted to harm you?" Salas said, hiding his guilt. "Do I have any reason to harm you? I have a huge grudge against Brian. I'm also here to settle debts with him, just like you." Daka didn't overthink it. Seeing how agitated Salas seemed, he said, "I don't know if you've actually entrapped us, but if it wasn't for your suggestion, we wouldn't have entered this place." "Hey, own up for your own actions for once. Dagmar himself charged in here. What does this have to do with me, damn it? Don't blame others just because you fucked up. I'll quit if you keep doing this." Salas didn't have a good temper to begin with. Though his temperament now was much more subdued than when he was at the Fringe, thanks to the losses he suffered at the hands of Han Shuo and his son, his short fuse was still there. Coupled with the fact that Salas was contemptuous of Daka and the rest to begin with, he doubled down on his attitude. Seeing Salas rage, Daka stopped wasting time arguing with him and shut up after an unhappy humph. He knew that he still needed Salas to fight their way out of the caverns. If Salas was to ignore him now in a fit of pique, as an overgod, Daka could most likely survive this predicament. The majority of his subordinates, however, would perish. Making a mental note to revisit this matter, Daka shut up and focused on destroying the rocks that had filled the path they took. While the rocks were almost impervious to ordinary experts, Daka and Salas were powerful enough that it wasn't a problem. They eventually managed to open up a path leading outside. "Retreat!" Daka yelled, letting his subordinates through first instead of charging out first. His men hurriedly charged towards their singular hope for survival. Loud explosions continued to ring out from the center of the mountains as the shaking got worse. The two of them felt that the mountain would collapse sooner or later. "Heavens, what is going on here?" Daka's subordinates exclaimed at the center of the valley. As a result of the explosions, cracks hundreds of meters deep formed at the feet of the mountain into a mess that resembled a spider's web. It was as if a mouth opened up at the feet of the three mountains, attempting to swallow all three of them up. "Quick, run!" Daka felt the mountains sinking rapidly. He wondered who could be so powerful to force three huge mountains to fall towards the ground within such a short time. With things set in stone, there was no stopping the mountains from sinking into the abyss. The forces of the ground closed in on the sinking mountains with huge pressure, while the energies within the mountains themselves exploded outwards. Once again, another tragic disaster had unfolded. As the mountains sank, the runes etched on them exploded one after another. Then, as though a chain reaction, an even greater explosion erupted inside the mountains, causing them to fracture into many more pieces. The god hunters within them were either crushed by the sheer force of those explosions or by the falling rocks. In but an instant, most of the three's subordinates had perished in the mountains. Chapter 949, Chao GDK 949. Chao Daka, Dagmar and Acer had never imagined this trip of theirs to end with such heavy and swift losses. It was too quick and fierce for them to react. The three mountains had mostly sunk into the ground before a minute had even passed as explosions rang loudly from their depths. It took only moments for thousands of lives to be claimed. This was possibly the worst loss anyone had suffered in the Fringe. The rumbling echoed nonstop. Once the three mountains had sunk more than halfway through the ground, they cracked open in the middle. The power that had been brewing within the mountains were unleashed in an energetic burst, causing many god hunters within the mountains to howl in agony. One bloody figure after another burst out the mountains. It was at this moment that the thick cloud of smoke began descending from the sky while carrying a most terrifying force. Many of the figures that were sent flying from the mountains were crushed by the immense pressure before they landed with audible splats and turned into meat paste. It turned out that the black smoke hovering above the valley, which had gathered corrosive gases on those mountains, had been waiting for this moment. The three mountains had turned into hell on earth. Even though the explosions had subsided, the howls of pain never stopped and grew louder and more bone-chillingly frequent. Gradually, the dust and explosions settled. After the smoke that descended took another 1,000 lives, it dispersed into nothingness. Ashes and dust kept falling from the sky instead of rocky shards. It seemed as if peace and quiet had returned. The three mountains had sunk into the ground completely, though they hadn't been reduced to complete rubble. Gradually, figures covered in injuries walked out from the mountains with broken bones and blood at the corner of their mouths. There were only 10s of them that were completely uninjured, and all of them were powerful high gods. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were the last three to come out of the mountains. Seeing their pitiful subordinates, their expressions darkened. They were like volcanoes that could erupt at any moment. Salas had also managed to leave. Once more, he experienced firsthand the terror of the House of Han. By now, he had made his decision to never again fight the House of Han. It wasn't that he was a coward. They just far superseded his expectations, based on the fact that Daka and the other two lost close to half of their men before even encountering their enemy directly. Thinking back, Salas recalled how he was just like the three of them back then, filled with the ambition of eliminating pandemonium. Yet, that had gotten him trapped in some weird barrier with none of his subordinates even spotting half a person from the House of Han. He had suffered a loss as heavy as this too. Having seen that happen once again, Salas was humbled and accepted his defeat completely. He was not a match in a one-on-one fight against Han Shuo, and the might of the House of Han guards were now unmatched by most. Coupled with the crazy defenses they employed, Salas wasn't sure anymore whether he could afford to fight against them. He decided he would completely forget this notion of getting even with them. Initially, he had planned to settle debts with the House of Han once everything was over, but now he was certain that wasn't a path he wanted to go down. "Let's assess our losses," Daka said, after a long period of silence and heavy sighing. His henchmen that didn't dare to speak up the whole time immediately carried out their orders. Dagmar and Acer also waved to get their subordinates to do the same. The subordinates called their names one after another, but only half of them answered. Daka and the other two hegemons seemed even grimmer. Soon, the verdict was out. They had each come with more than 1,000 subordinates, but only half survived. Only around 2,000 god hunters in total made it out from the mountains alive, with varying injuries right before they encountered even a single member from the House of Han. "Salas," Dagmar roared as he shot him a venomous glare. "We were about to leave this place, yet you insisted on going in. What does this have to do with me?" Salas said dauntlessly. He glared coldly back at Acer and Daka. "So you want to push all the blame on me if something goes wrong, huh? Is that how you usually conduct yourselves? How did the House of Han know we were coming? How did they manage to set a trap for us? Salas, how can you claim to know nothing about this?" Dagmar spat as he ran his throne rapidly close to Salas. "I didn't know anything, of course." Salas pointed at Dagmar angrily and continued, "You think I'll betray you? Damn it, I've been chased out of the Fring by Brian and the House of Han, and my mountain was razed to the ground by him. I don't even have a home to return to. And now you're saying that I'd sell you out to him. Have you gone mad because of the quintessence shard? I don't believe the House of Han can possibly know that much. If it wasn't for you guiding us here, we never would have arrived in the first place, said the usually quiet Acer. It seemed he began to suspect Salas as well. Salas, shocked, suddenly backed off to a safe distance from the three of them. You lot have gone insane. You're blaming me for the loss of your men. I guess there's nothing else to be said. I'm out of here and leave you to deal with this however you like. After that, before they could respond, Salas transformed into a lightning bolt and zoomed off to the distance. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer blanked out. They didn't think Salas would leave just like that. All three of them had pushed the responsibility of this incident to Salas because of some lingering suspicion, but they were more concerned with finding a scapegoat for their horrible losses. If they didn't blame it on someone else, it would be hard to justify such incompetent leadership to their subordinates. In truth, they had never believed Salas would join hands with Han Shuo. Like Salas himself said, he bore seething hate for the House of Han. They had clearly researched Salas' own experiences in Pandemonium before inviting him to join them, so while they wanted to blame him, they wouldn't actually act against him. If they really felt that he had betrayed them, they wouldn't have let him know about it. Instead, they would attack him while he was unprepared for it. They wouldn't even give him a chance to explain himself. Now, the three of them seemed even worse off. They didn't expect Salas to leave without any hesitation. Having lost their guide, things would be much harder for them, especially with the losses they'd suffered. Darn it, he's really gone, Dagmar roared. He was still filled with pent-up rage. He had wanted to vent it on Salas, though that only caused him to leave. There's no helping it. Given our current strength, we should be able to deal with Pandemonium just fine if we don't fall for more traps, remarked Daka. He knew that the three of them couldn't afford any more division. Even if he was still frustrated from what happened and wanted to vent it on Dagmar, he would have no choice but to endure it. Daka had come filled with confidence and mouthed off on how he would utterly crush the House of Han. Yet now, he didn't seem so assured about dealing with Pandemonium now. That's right, we can definitely crush Pandemonium, Daka emphasized, though it sounded more like self-consolation more than anything. Given how bad the losses they've suffered, nothing they said would really sound convincing. Let's tend to their injuries first. It's best we leave this dangerous place immediately, Acer said, feeling a little unwell at the sight of the three sunken mountains. The other two agreed and gave the injured god hunters some preliminary treatment before leaving. Soon after they left, Han Shuo and Han Hao came out of one of the large cracks underneath. Han Shuo observed the surroundings in midair and said a little forlornly, "What a shame we didn't have more time to calibrate the formation." The implosion was asymmetrical, making the yield a fraction of what's possible. Otherwise, the three mountains wouldn't just collapse, they'd explode instead. Had that happened, Daka, Dagmar, and Acer would have gotten hurt themselves, let alone their subordinates. Father, this is already a good result. I doubt they'd be able to cause Pandemonium any more trouble after their loss here. Han Hao looked at the cracks and said, "Would the collapse of the mountains and the cracks in the ground affect my underground palace? It will somewhat. But don't worry. After this is over, Han Jin and Han Tu will be able to restore it. I'm sure the rocks that have gathered down there will make your palace even more secure," Han Shu said smilingly. As he spoke, he waved and gathered the god hunters' souls that had yet to dissipate into the cauldron of myriad demons. "Let's go. We'll see them at Pandemonium soon." "I doubt they'd dare to show up again," Han Hao said with a smile. He found messing with Daka rather interesting. "That's fine as well. In fact, that would be ideal. Let them head to Omphalos. Log and Tyre will be there as well, so it's best they duke it out with each other," Han Shu said with a hearty laugh before he left with Little Skeleton's half-formed avatar. Chapter 950, Love at First Sight GDK 950. Love at first sight, when Han Shu returned to the Pandemonium, he was surprised to find Andrina there waiting for him. It was obvious from the aura emanating from her that she had now become much stronger than when they were back in the Darkness Dominion. Andrina was acquainted with the House of Han members, especially Fanny, since the time she traveled to the profound continent with Han Shuo to bring them to Elysium. She was invited into the Pandemonium when the House of Han members noticed her outside. Otherwise, even with her current strength, there was no way that she could intrude into the valley and remain unscathed. Han Shuo had deployed a ton of terrifying formations around the Pandemonium in anticipation of the God Hunter Alliance's invasion. She would undoubtedly be injured if she had tried intruding into the valley. Andrina had been waiting in the pandemonium for a few days, and she had been exploring every aspect of the valley. The defenses of the pandemonium was primarily made up of demonic formations deployed by Han Shuo and the 5 elite zombie, and supplemented by defensive formations powered by energy crystals. She was most interested in the demonic formations deployed by Han Shuo and the 5 elite zombies. The unique energies on those formations had piqued her curiosity. Although she had a ton of questions, no one could explain how those formations worked, as the 5 elite zombies were all still cultivating underground. Perhaps she had been too bored in the Destiny Dominion. She became hyperactive after entering the pandemonium. It was as though there was nothing that won't make her excited. From time to time, she would even deliberately step into formations and traps to discover their power and find out how they worked. She seemed to be having lots of fun, as though those dangerous traps were rides in a theme park. Andrina was even more excited when Han Shu returned to the pandemonium. She cheerfully said, "Brian, so you've relocated here. Why didn't you look for me all these while when the Destiny Dominion is just nearby? That's outrageous. Do you not consider me as your friend anymore, or have you forgotten about me?" Andrina was always cold and unfriendly towards strangers, but not to her friends like Han Shuo. "I have been very busy with work and managing my family clan. How would I have time to visit you? Besides, I have absolutely no idea where the Destiny Shrine is, other than that it's somewhere in the Destiny Dominion," replied Han Shuo smilingly. He had absolutely no thought of going to the Destiny Dominion to visit Andrina. For some reason, Han Shuo felt that he needed to be wary of the Destiny Goddess. Sometimes he even suspected that the Destiny Goddess knew about his origins. Over the past many years, as Han Shuo had to face stronger and stronger experts, he had no choice but to stop concealing the demonic energy he cultivates. If the Destiny Goddess knew about the exalted Demon Lord's appearance in this universe, and discovers that Han Shuo cultivates the same energy as the exalted Demon Lord, then she could easily deduce Han Shuo's origins and secrets. After all, how could the goddess who mastered destiny be unaware of such a significant incident? "You, busy?" Andrina lightly pouted and snorted before she said, "Don't think that I have been clueless about what you did in the Fringe. In fact, I knew every move you made ever since you stepped into the Fringe." Han Shuo stared blankly for a moment and asked, "Huh, you have been staying in the Destiny Shrine the whole time. How would you know my every move?" "My mother told me," Andrina grinned and explained. "She knew every move you made and would often tell me what you have been doing. She also told me that you carry a ton of secrets with you." Han Shuo's heart sank a little as his suspicions seemed likely to be true. However, he did not think much further on this issue. With the same calm and collected smile, he asked Andrina, "Why did not come here? Did your mother know about it?" "Nope. She went to meet Nestor, the over-god of death, for some business, so I sneaked out while she was away." "Hee," answered Andrina in a big cheeky smile, as though she wasn't worried that the goddess would punish her. Han Shuo grimaced and said nothing, for he was speechless. "Hee, I heard that the God Hunter Alliance is going to invade the Fringe, so I've come to provide you aid." "Don't tell me that I'm not welcomed?" asked Andrina, and she faked a frown. "Of course you are welcomed here. How would I dare say otherwise?" replied Han Shuo after putting on a happy face. He continued, "There happen to be some energy towers and batteries that are not quite up to my satisfaction. You could take a look at them." The energy that Andrina cultivated was related to energy crystals. She had extraordinary profound insights and expertise in the manipulation and use of energy crystals. With her assistance, Han Shuo believed that the pandemonium's defenses could be brought to an even greater height. "No problem at all. In fact, I've already inspected every one of them. I'm just waiting for you to return before modifying any, lest your people think that I'm sabotaging the base," agreed Andrina immediately. She had been strolling around the pandemonium for a long time. She had been itching to demonstrate her skills and power. After a short pause, Andrina continued, "However, in order to alter and enhance your energy towers, I will need at least 3 times the energy crystals in those towers. Do you have that much energy crystals?" "No problem." Han Xiu laughed heartily while telepathically instructing Han Jin, who was meditating in the underground gymnasium, to bring over the energy crystals in his reserves. As the owner of Goldstone Enterprise, Han Jin always had an abundance of energy crystals. As most of the defenses of the Pandemonium were composed of demonic formations, many of the energy crystals were not utilized. On top of that, Han Hao had previously plundered a ton of goods from the Omphalos merchants, with some of those goods being energy crystals. Therefore, the number of energy crystals stored in the underground warehouse of the Pandemonium was almost immeasurable. Han Jin, who was practicing the penta-elemental undead formation in the underground gymnasium, immediately paused his activity and headed to the energy crystal warehouse. He loaded up an entire space ring with energy crystals of the highest grade and went to Han Xiu. "Wow!" exclaimed Han Jin before his jaw dropped to the floor. He gaped at Andrina as though he had been frozen. He was completely stupefied. Bright, white halos radiated from Andrina as though water ripples. She stared back at Han Jin with her pupils glowing with blinding light. Han Jin and Andrina stared fixedly at each other as though time had stopped. Bizarre soul undulations emanated from their bodies as they communicated in a manner that even Han Xiu could not understand. The two continued to communicate without moving a muscle and stared each other in the eye for hours. Han Xiu felt as though he had been forgotten. At first, Han Xiu found their behavior rather baffling, but he soon realized what was happening. Han Jin was made from the yuan energy of metal, and he possessed the golden cudgel, the supreme treasure of metal. Not only was he born with the knowledge of all metals and stones, but he could also even manipulate stones and walk through rocks. Andrina was also not an ordinary life form who could eat energy crystals to replenish and increase her energy. Both her soul and her energy had the characteristics of energy crystals. Even her body was filled with the purest power of energy crystals. She was basically the most unique energy crystal which is alive. The more unique a stone is, the more attractive it was to Han Jin. Meanwhile, the metal yuan energy on Han Jin should also be irresistible to Andrina. Therefore, it was only natural that chemistry would happen when these two unique life forms with the most complementing properties met each other. Han Jin and Andrina communicated in a manner that no other beings in the universe could understand. They were completely motionless and as still as stone. If it wasn't for the intense soul undulations emanating from them, Han Xiu might even mistake them for sculptures. Han Xiu continued to observe the duo curiously. He was pleasantly surprised by their chemistry and felt glad. Han Xiu had always hoped that little skeleton and the 5 elite zombies would not just have formidable strength, but also to develop holistically like a normal human being, to actually live their lives instead of being cold and emotionless undead. Perhaps because of his womanizing ways, deep in his heart, Han Xiu wished that his children would also have romantic partners of their own, and maybe even their own children. After half a day, Zavik suddenly hurried over to Han Xiu to inform him of important news. Perhaps his voice was not soft enough, and Andrina and Han Jin, who were still staring at each other, were roused. Clarity slowly returned to their eyes, and the two of them smiled. They walked to each other and held hands without the slightest awkwardness. It was so natural and smooth, as though Han Jin and Andrina had known each other for hundreds of years. Their smiles turned even brighter, and they seemed like the most matching couple that was deeply in love. Han Xiu was flabbergasted. He had considered the possibility of Han Jin and Andrina becoming a couple, but never imagined that they would become lovebirds just hours after meeting each other. "Father, I finally understand how you feel towards Phoebe and the others. It feels so strange yet so wonderful," said Han Jin, as though he knew the answer to the ultimate question. "Good, good," Han Xiu laughed heartily. He could not be more delighted. Chapter 951, Accidents Happen, just leave the rest to the two of us. "I will settle Andrina's matter," Han Jin confidently said. It seemed that he was quite excited after conversing mentally with her. "That's right, we'll do it properly, rest assured," Andrina said with a smile. She took frequent glances at Han Jin as she spoke. Han Jin was more familiar with Pandemonium's layout. Back when Han Xiu created the various formations within it, Han Jin and the rest had been helping out, so apart from Han Xiu, Han Jin and the other 4 knew Pandemonium best. With him helping Andrina out, Han Shuo believed she would be able to realize her greatest potential. Seeing the two of them so confident, he let them do as they pleased. "All right, I also have some stuff to tend to." He told Han Jin some final bits he had to pay attention to about certain special formations before leaving the alteration and enhancement of the various energy towers to the couple. When Zavik came about, he reported to Han Shuo that the Godhunter Alliance's forces had entered Pandemonium. Tyre, Log, Wasir, and Asura could launch a joint attack at any time. The hegemons of the Godhunter Alliance seemed powerful and united like never before, which didn't bode well for the sovereigns of the Fringe. It will be an uphill battle for the sovereigns, to say the least. However, Han Shu knew they had their own trump cards. They had fortified the Fringe for years, so as long as they could properly take advantage of the terrain by setting up powerful formations at strategic locations, they could deal the invaders a catastrophic blow and still stand a chance at winning the war. For instance, Log's Audiobook contained intense elements of death, thanks to the centuries of work he had put in. Log would definitely be far more powerful within Audiobook and could possibly defeat Tyre there, as he had long become one with the death energy there. If the Godhunters invaded Audiobook, Log could use the Audiobook to boost the strengths of his high god, subordinates to the point where a group of them could repel an overgod on his level. And if Log and his high gods worked together, they could possibly even annihilate an overgod outright. The same would apply to Tyre, Wasir, and Asura. As long as they make good use of the advantages they have and create some opportunities, they would definitely fare much better in battle and stand a chance at winning. Upon reaching the bottom of Pandemonium, Han Shuo located Han Hao's surrogate and asked, "How long will it take for your main body to return?" "I'm already in the Fringe. I should arrive in 3 more days," Little Skeleton replied after some thought. Nodding, Han Shuo said, "I'm spying on Dagmar and the others using a demon general that has a stand of my consciousness attached. Currently, they are still recovering. I believe they won't enter Pandemonium in at least 10 days to half a month. With you, your brothers, Andrina, Sanguis, and the rest here, Dagmar and his pals won't be able to breach our defenses easily. Will you be leaving for something?" Han Hao stared blankly for a moment before he realized something from Han Shuo's words and asked, "Yeah, I'll be going out for a bit. Don't worry, I'll return immediately once the matter is settled. Given your abilities and the defensive power of the Pandemonium, Daka and the rest won't be able to breach Pandemonium easily. It'll be fine. Go ahead. I'll take good care of this place." After informing Little Skeleton about the uses of various formations in Pandemonium and how to operate them, Han Shu felt assured enough to leave on his errand. At Frost Cavern on Glacial Peak, Wasir was sitting cross-legged like an ice sculpture, allowing the bone-chilling cold to envelop him. A figure entered Frost Cavern and respectfully reported, "Lord, we received word that the hegemons from the Space and Destiny Dominions are on their way." The ice that shrouded him suddenly cracked apart and shattered into countless pieces as Wasir emerged from it. Powerful glacial energy leaked from him as he was reanimated. His energy seemed to have become one with Frost Cavern itself. "Angelo, are you certain of this news?" he finally asked after he finished some warm-up. Angelo, who also cultivated the water energy, took a few steps back. The cold that was radiating from Wasir was too terrifying to the point that even he couldn't take it. "I am certain. They are heading for Glacial Peak. The 2 hegemons on the way are also said to be the most mysterious ones. Nobody knows their true power. What should we do?" "Space, destiny," Wasir furrowed his brow, as if he was thinking about something very important. "Hegemons that cultivate in these arcane edicts will no doubt be something to look forward to." It's said that the Edict of Destiny is the most mysterious among the 12 fundamental forces. There are only a few Destiny Edict cultivators who have managed to reach the High God stage in the world, so those that do must be really secretive and impressive. I wonder what kind of strength these hegemons will have. "Lord, people who cultivate the space energy are also really powerful. If they reach the Overgod stage, they will be able to intrude the glacial peak without anyone noticing. Should we make some preparations?" Angelo was quite anxious. Though Wasir was powerful, he was but one man, yet 2 allegedly powerful hegemons were on the way. He didn't know whether Wasir alone could deal with them. "Any preparation that I can possibly make has been dealt with," Wasier said, knowing what Angelo implied with his question. Those like us that cultivate the energy of water should remain as cool as ice even in the face of overwhelming threat. If you want to advance to the next stage, you must remember to not have any fear or panic even if you're about to die. Thank you for your teachings, Lord. Angelo was truly grateful as he looked at Wasier with adoration. Among the 5 sovereigns of the fringe, the hardest to get along with was Wasier, yet he was famous for one particular trait of his. Any cultivator of the water energy would be able to make huge progress after receiving crucial tips from him. He would generously give cultivation advice unreservedly, even to someone like Angelo, at the late-stage high god realm, who has the potential to improve to Wasier's level with his teachings. It was as if he didn't fear his subordinates growing more powerful than him. It was also thanks to this that most of the water energy users from the 12 divine dominions would join him when they come to the fringe. You may leave now. Tell them they no longer have to stand guard outside Glacial Peak and get them to enter Frost Cavern. Activate all the energy towers to gather all the glacial aura around the peak. As for those that don't cultivate in water energy, have them retreat into the mountains for now, Wasier ordered. Angelo nodded and left to spread the word. But before Wasier's men could carry out the order, a large space-time fissure suddenly appeared above Glacial Peak. Countless figures emerged from the spatial tier and landed on Glacial Peak before they started searching for their target. Wasier, I can foretell your every move. There is no way that you can win this. Though your fate is sealed, your subordinates are not. Leave your Glacial Peak and have a chat with us if you don't want them to perish with you, said an old crone with a pentagram mark on her chest. She held a brilliant green crystal ball. Her voice rang with a mysterious cadence that lingered in the air of Glacial Peak. As she spoke, more and more figures came out of the spatial fissure, before an old man with long eyebrows came out and pulled it close like one would close some curtains. Wasier, with Massey predicting your actions and me sealing up the surrounding space, you won't stand a chance, not even at escaping, said the old man smilingly. He walked up to Frost Cavern and raised his arms, causing space-time itself to twist and waves to undulate through it. Though Angelo and the others wanted to seek refuge in the cavern, they suddenly noticed that the nature of the space there had changed. They weren't able to move at all and couldn't do what Wasier had instructed them to. One to predict my actions and the other to lock down space itself. You two might just have the strongest combination I've ever seen. I must be quite lucky, Wasier said from within the cavern. He was standing at the entrance and coldly staring at the 2 leaders. Wasier, not only is your destiny sealed, the fringe's destiny has been sealed too, said the old crone called Massey solemnly and loftily with her fingers laid on her crystal ball. It was as if she held the fates of all. You're not an over-god, Wasier suddenly said after staring intently at Massey. Those who cultivate in the Edict of Destiny, Massey said as she pointed towards the direction of the Destiny Dominion, have never become an over-god, nor demi-over-gods for that matter, apart from that person. No exceptions, we are not like you can reach the over-god realm without a quintessence, but will forever remain at high god. After a pause, Massey chuckled. But this is more than enough. She furrowed her brow as her crystal ball shone all of a sudden. Dennis, act now. He seems to be waiting for someone my precognition isn't able to predict. Chapter 952, Arrival GDK 952. Arrival Dennis, the hegemon of space, seemed a little perplexed at Massey's words, as if he still hadn't come to understand how dire the situation was. He shot her a confused look and said, Massey, didn't you say nothing that happens will be able to escape your detection? The crystal ball glowed dark green in her hands, causing her to furrow her brows in terror. Enough nonsense, Dennis. Act now. I can feel Wasier's waiting for someone to come, and that someone is definitely not our friend. Who in the world can help him? Dennis still didn't seem hurried, unlike the panicked Massey. The 5 sovereigns of the fringe don't really interfere with one another's business. Apart from an overgod, nobody should be able to break my spatial lock. What are you worried about? Wasier thinks that once that person arrives, the 2 of us might not escape Glacial Peak alive. That's what he truly believes. My insight definitely isn't off, there's a catch. Dennis, we've worked together for many years, yet you trust me so little? Massey glared at him angrily. Wasier was quite taken aback. He didn't think that a high god like Massey would actually be able to divine his thoughts that clearly. What he didn't understand, however, was why she couldn't find out the identity of that mysterious fellow. Seeing Massey angry for real, the seriousness of the situation finally sank in for Dennis. He knew how accurate her predictions were, and she definitely wouldn't be messing with him in such a crucial moment. He had decided to act immediately. But before he could, Wasier had deployed his sub-zero domain of divinity, immediately causing a white fog to emanate from the cavern behind him. The fog of cold enveloped him. He had cultivated in Frost Cavern for years and long had become one with the frost energy within it. He allowed it to circle around him before letting the snake-like fog slither towards Dennis and Massey. Wherever the fog touched, space itself crackled nonstop. The region that Dennis had locked up was shattering like a mirror. Those subordinates of Wasier that had been frozen in place suddenly felt that they could move again. They immediately broke free from their bindings and hastily charged into Frost Cavern without their master asking. They were afraid of being captured by the spatial energy once more. Dennis' expression shifted as he humphed. "Wasier, did you think you'd be able to survive this? I alone am enough to defeat you, let alone now that I have Massey with me. You might not know this, but those who cultivate in the Edict of Destiny can make you tremble even if they're just high gods." Dennis yelled as powerful spatial waves reverberated from his body, affecting the structure of spacetime around him and morphing it into a sharp blade, which he sent cutting in Wasier's direction. The moment that blade manifested, Wasier's white fog was affected by the spatial energy around it. Not only could it not continue to spread, it was also pushed back towards Wasier. It looked just like a waterfall which flowed in reverse. The fog seemed to be sucked right back into Frost Cavern. At the same time, Massey snickered and suddenly put all 10 of her fingers into the crystal ball. A vague silhouette had formed in the ball, and it seemed to resemble Wasier. Massey's fingers glowed within the crystal ball. The green glow stretched out like threads and slowly enveloped the little figure within the ball. When the green tendrils surrounded the limbs of the figure, Massey laughed and pulled with force. All of a sudden, Wasier, who had been trying to fill the surroundings with frozen boulders, felt his limbs tense up as if hundreds of formless threads had bound them. He couldn't move at all as he watched the spatial blade come his way. "Wasier, nobody has managed to defeat Massey and I when we work together. Haha, accept your destiny." Dennis watched as the spatial blade continued to gather spatial energy as it rapidly shot towards the frozen Wasier. At that moment, all the energy within Wasier's body was activated to their fullest potential. The fog that came back towards him didn't enter his body, but rather freeze it. Now he was one with the frost in the cavern and had turned into a block of unmelting ice right as the spatial blade fell. A sharp, grating sound came from Wasier's body, though it didn't part immediately from the spatial blade. Instead, the blade cut in gradually inch by inch. Wasier's expression was now completely pale. Some blood leaked from the corner of his mouth and turned into a crimson icicle. "It's a shame all I can do is stop his body's movements. I can't do anything about his soul. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to form those protective ice around himself and would have been dead by now." Massey's fingers twitched and caused the green tendrils to pierce deep into the little figure in the crystal ball. "You'll be able to advance to the realm of Overgod once you find the quintessence shard, after which you'll be able to bind souls as well as bodies. By then, the two of us will rule the entirety of Godhunter Alliance." Dennis consoled with a smile. As far as they were concerned, it was over for Wasier. It was only a matter of time before the spatial blade cut him into two halves. On top of that, Massey's incorporeal tendrils were damaging his body as they burrowed deep into it. This combination was truly terrifying. Massey was able to see each and every move Wasier would take, while Dennis could make extremely formidable attacks. The longer the fight went on, the lower the chances of Wasier's survival until he would be finally driven into a wall of despair. Dennis and Massey chuckled and chatted without paying too much attention to Glacial Peak. They knew that the fortifications and barriers around the peak wouldn't be able to be used to their full potential once Wasier was dead. The high gods that would be left would have absolutely no chance against the two of them. "Quick, Wasier is still holding on to hope for that someone to come. We'll kill him first and entrap the person he's waiting for." Massey said as she put more power into forming more tendrils to bind Wasier. The battle was soon reaching its end. After Angelo managed to enter the cavern with much effort, he saw Wasier helpless against the spatial blade that was cutting into him. "Lord," he cried desperately. All the subordinates that managed to enter the cavern had only one thought in their minds: saving their lord. Even though Wasier didn't hold back when he punished them from time to time, his subordinates still remained loyal to him even in his time of crisis. They charged out from the cavern fearlessly and suicidally towards Dennis and Massey. "You've come to die." Dennis laughed, and spatial waves spread from his body once more. All of a sudden, a few fist-sized holes of light appeared on the bodies of Wasier's subordinates. They had such powerful suction that the subordinates' bodies were seemingly liquefied as they were pulled into the center of the hole. Not one trace of their bodies remained. Wasier's eyes burned with anger. Even though he was captured, he could perceive his surroundings perfectly well. Only now did he find out that his subordinates were truly loyal to him despite how often he scolded them. He watched as they gave their lives for his sake in vain. It was too bad Massey stopped him from moving completely. He also had to constantly expend divine energy within his body to defend against Dennis's spatial blade. There was nothing he could do to help them. "Why aren't you coming? Why aren't you here yet? Have you used me the whole time? Why? Why?" He glared towards the distance as hate festered in his mind. He felt like he had been betrayed. He was driven so close to desperation that he wanted to cast his body away and take out the enemy with him in his soul form. As if someone had heard Wasier's desperate inner plea, a sharp sound could suddenly be heard from afar. It had come from countless terrifying life forms that sported rows and rows of razor-sharp teeth. The creatures were so dense together, they looked like a thundercloud approaching at full speed. A terrifying and insidious energy was being radiated from the body of those creatures. When they collided with Dennis's spatial lock barrier, it crumbled almost instantly. With the spatial barrier broken, the creatures flooded all over like bats as they charged towards Godhunter subordinates of Dennis and Massey. Glacial Peak was covered in darkness all of a sudden while the creatures landed on every inch of the peak. Wasier's eyes flashed with delight and joy. The moment he saw those creatures, he knew he hadn't misplaced his trust. His chance to take revenge was finally here. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 17 flying swords cut through the horizon and appeared above Glacial Peak. Before Massey and Dennis could react, they had been surrounded by a net that was weaved from the light trails of the flying swords. Before long, the net began to close in on them. Chapter 953, Turning Tides GDK 953. Turning Tides Dennis and Massey felt like they had fallen from heaven into hell. Before they were able to completely crush Wasier, they ended up trapped for some reason beyond their knowledge. By the time they came to their senses, they had found themselves surrounded by razor-sharp swords orbiting threateningly around them, causing them to gulp in fear. In their panic, their control over Wasier crumbled. Dennis's spatial blade no longer maintained its previous power and could no longer cut deeper into Wasier. Massey was worse off. Having freaked out, and with her soul in a chaotic state, the mysterious edict of destiny she deployed through her crystal ball was rendered useless. Wasier felt the pressure on his body suddenly released as he regained control over his hands and legs. The power that bound him was no more. He was greeted with the sight of his subordinates being killed by warp vortexes. The moment the pressure on him lightened, the white fog gathered around him swiftly aggregate and collided against the spatial blade. Dennis, now surrounded by the 17 flying swords, could no longer fuel the spatial blade with his divine energy of space. So the blade quickly disintegrated from Wasier's anger-fueled attack in a white flash. The icy divine power circulated a few times through his body and purged the remnant traces of destiny edict, divine energy within him. Then, he turned his cold gaze towards the duo who were surrounded by the swords. "Who is it? Show yourself," Dennis yelled. He could feel the danger lurking in the surroundings, yet he couldn't pinpoint the location of his enemy. Massey's expression was grave. The crystal ball's green glow was rather subdued, though the light it cast on her face made her seem dark and terrifying. Strands of light were shot from her fingers into her crystal ball. By now, she had completely given up on applying any more pressure on Wasier and chose, instead, to focus all her attention on their hidden adversary. They both knew that their assailant was a really powerful expert who commanded powers they were not familiar with. It didn't help that they couldn't detect the location of this mysterious enemy who could be more powerful than Wazir. For some reason, Massey's crystal ball didn't seem to work well in pinpointing their foe's location, no matter how many strands of destiny energy she cast into it. No figure appeared within the ball at all. "Haven't you found him yet?" Dennis seemed a little panicked because now the ice around Wazir had completely vanished. It was a sign he had almost regained all his fighting prowess. If one single hidden assailant was enough to drive them to such dire straits, they would certainly fare much worse now that Wazir was going to join the fray. "I can't locate him. This is baffling," Massey said with a hint of panic, unlike her previously confident self. "With all my power, I should be able to locate most demi-overgods, yet I'm not able to locate this person at all. What does this mean?" Dennis leaned in against Massey as the 17 flying swords was still weaving its web smaller and smaller. He felt a strong threat coming from the swords, so he had no choice but to retreat to the center of the web like Massey. Apart from overgods with quintessence or quintessence shards, only an expert with supreme mastery of the soul could elude the binding power of the Edict of Destiny. It's obvious that he's not one of the 12 overgods, so either he has a shard, or his mastery of the soul is advanced to the point where he can change destiny itself. The moment he heard it, Dennis felt rather taken aback. Someone who possessed a quintessence shard would definitely be worried of being pursued by one of the 12 overgods, so they would certainly be very careful about revealing their power. In fact, they wouldn't even show up on Elysium and would usually cultivate on remote material planes. People like this numbered far and few in between and wouldn't show up in centuries or even millennia. On the other hand, those who had such high mastery in matters of the soul to be able to elude destiny was just as rare. In either case, their might would certainly be so powerful that even Dennis and Massey would be really wary of it. "We have to escape from this," Dennis said, seeing the swords closing in on them. "I'm afraid I'm not too proficient at matters like this." Massey was already far from a brute force fighter, given that she cultivated in the Edict of Destiny in the first place. The web of swords obviously wouldn't be affected by her edict, so she felt rather helpless. Dennis fell silent for a moment as he generated an intense undulation of spatial energy around him. He intended to construct a spatial fissure through which they could leave. However, the moment he unleashed his power, he suddenly noticed that the energy coming from the swords had affected the spatial makeup of the surroundings. The space he and Massey occupied suddenly felt a little foreign, so foreign that he wasn't able to form a spatial fissure to leave through. "What's wrong?" Massey asked when she saw him move and suddenly stop. "He's terrifying." Dennis took a deep breath as if he had steeled his resolve and grabbed onto Massey. The two of them seemingly turned into smoke and wafted into a scroll. The scroll fluttered around in the web of swords and let out powerful spatial pulses. A strong light shot out, and the two of them suddenly vanished from within the web, only to reappear far above Glacial Peak. "Dennis, did you just destroy the pocket dimension you spent 1,000 years building?" Massey cried out in shock. Powerful spatial cultivators like Dennis could use their power and insights into the Edict of Space to make their own personal pocket dimension like the Space Overgod. Within that pocket dimension, they would be omnipotent and have control over everything. The scroll that was just torn up was the basis Dennis used to construct the pocket dimension. There was a minor plane within that had mountains, rivers, and lakes, much like the real world, apart from the lack of life forms. Dennis had spent 1,000 years crafting it. The only reason he got so closely acquainted with Massey was because he hoped she would be able to find a quintessence shard of destiny, so that she could imbue his pocket dimension with the power of destiny. He would then find another expert in the Edict of Life for the finishing touches of his plane. Once there was life on his plane, with the life and destiny routine operating, they could leave the Elysium for the pocket dimension he created. There, they would be all-powerful. Even overgods with quintessence wouldn't be able to defeat them within it. They would truly be able to reign freely and achieve everything they could ever desire. Overgods with quintessence may be invincible, but as long as they had the pocket dimension, they would be safe from the overgods, provided that they could escape into it before being instantly annihilated. It was a shame that his half-formed pocket dimension was ruined before it was truly realized. Massey, seeing the pocket dimension she had spent much effort forming with Dennis, seemed even more distraught than he was as she suddenly coughed out blood onto her crystal ball. At that moment, her soul and crystal ball seemed to fuse. Synapses and connections seemed to form in the crystal ball until they became two hemispheres of a brain. Gradually, a human brain was clearly revealed in the crystal ball. There was a gray smoke with an erratic form floating within it that almost resembled a soul. Gradually, a blurry figure formed within the ball alongside the clouds around him. He moved swiftly under the cover of the clouds. Dennis glared closely at the figure within the crystal ball. A few seconds later, he seemed to have realized something and looked up at the sky. A very vague shadow suddenly charged downwards from the clouds towards them. All of a sudden, they could feel strong killing intent gushing out like water from a broken dam. "He's up there," Dennis cried, before he grabbed Massey and teleported away. He also gave her crystal ball a tap, causing her to snap out of it. Blood vessels streaked across her eyes, and blood oozed out of both her nostrils. She had used her soul as a medium to peek into matters that should not have been visible to her, and so she would have to pay a heavy price for it. Beneath them, Wasir's men charged towards the invading god hunters with rabid fervor. Wasir didn't charge into the fight when he emerged from the ice after he saw Dennis and Massey trapped by the 17 flying swords. He merely glared at them and mercilessly killed the other god hunters instead. By the time they used the pocket dimension to escape, Wasir had already frozen up 9 high gods from the god hunter alliance. "Wasir will kill the woman first." Han Shu's voice rang from above Glacial Peak. With but a thought, 9 beams of frost shot out from Wasir onto the 9 high god ice sculptures, instantly shattering them into hundreds of pieces of frozen flesh. "I'm coming," Wasir smirked malevolently and no longer cared about the fight taking place on Glacial Peak. He flew towards Massey like a fierce demon. Back then, he couldn't do anything but watch his subordinates killed by the god hunters. He had sworn that he would definitely do everything in his power to keep Dennis and Massey on Glacial Peak forever if he ever managed to escape. Wasir had experienced the most painful moments of his life and overcome it. Having managed to escape his deathly predicament, he would have the two pay their debt in blood. Now that Han Shu had arrived, he no longer had to fight alone. "I'll show you that the Glacial Peak doesn't take kindly to being invaded," Wasir yelled as he closed in on the two from the bottom while Han Shuo did the same from the top, working together to execute a pincer maneuver. Chapter 954, Complete Annihilation, GDK 954. Complete Annihilation, Dennis and Massey had come with nothing but confidence. With Massey being able to predict every action and Dennis locking down the whole of Glacial Peak, Wasir was essentially a shark in a jar, a toothless threat. Little did they expect things would turn out this way, however. Not only were they unable to wipe out Wasir and his subordinates, but they were also now in dire straits themselves. Han Shu came swooping down from the skies and used the killing intent wrapping his body to form a gigantic hand, swatting down at Dennis and Massey to grab them. Wasir stretched his hand out and took out a 10-meter-long icicle from within the cavern. It looked like a precious crystal that emanated white smoke as a result of the sheer frost energy it contained. The frost energy contained within the lance-like icicle was so powerful that it seemed as if it was the crystallization of Frost Cavern's power itself. The moment Wasir struck with it, it caused the temperature around Frost Cavern to sink even lower. The gigantic hand came pressing down. Coupled with the terrifying frost, crackling sounds could be heard as wafts of smoke began appearing. Massey had managed to force Han Shu out after much difficulty, only to find that she was now his main target. She immediately tried to approach Dennis. Dennis had sacrificed much to escape Han Shu's sword formation. He grabbed Massey and teleported once more to the top of Glacial Peak. Massey's fingers were moving about on the crystal ball as she seemed to be weaving something within it. One after another, the green tendrils that came out of her fingers formed a mysterious picture. All of a sudden, Wasir's body stiffened. The icicle in his hand seemed to lose control as it came piercing towards Han Shu. The sudden change was so rapid that Wasir couldn't stop the attack in time. The icicle pierced towards Han Shu's gigantic palm. Han Shuo, move, he yelled. No worries, Han Shuo said from behind his giant palm before he dematerialized it. The killing intent that the palm was formed of scattered immediately. At the same time, a figure suddenly flew past Dennis with blinding speed. With but a thought, the 17 flying swords appeared from out of nowhere once more to surround Dennis and Massey. They were about to be trapped once again. However, having had previous experience dealing with the swords, Dennis had his guard up. He didn't wait for the swords to descend upon him and immediately teleported without letting the swords successfully surround him. Massey's power alone was able to cause some minor distraction to Wasir at most. Without Dennis working with her, she was far from able to kill him. When the icicle shot towards the sky, Wasir's divine energy raged within his body to counteract the mysterious energy that was nudging him from within. Now that he didn't have to worry about a spatial blade cutting towards him like before, it only took him 3 breaths' time to break free. Massey spat out a mouthful of blood from the blowback, from having her destiny energy repelled by Wasir. The blood covered the crystal ball in her hands, making it look rather gruesome. Dennis, let's retreat, she said helplessly with a pale look. Under pressure from the 17 flying swords, Dennis had no choice but to teleport short distances constantly. With Massey not being able to hold Wasir down, they would lose sooner or later, so she had to warn him to retreat. Dennis knew that the situation was now disadvantageous to them. Seeing Massey hurt and unable to pose any threat to Wasir, it suddenly dawned on him that while their combination would work against someone on par with them, they would suffer when they were up against 2 foes. Dennis also wanted to leave immediately, but the god hunters he and Massey had brought with them were still engaged in combat at Glacial Peak. His subordinates were already on the losing side to begin with, and if he left with Massey now, none of them would survive. Those men were Massey and Dennis's elite subordinates. If they were wiped out, they would definitely suffer a huge loss. Even if the God Hunter Alliance managed to defeat the Fringe in the end, the two would be hard-pressed to get any of the spoils with their subordinates all gone. As such, Dennis hesitated as he tried his best to find an opportunity to open up another spatial fissure through which his subordinates could retreat. As Dennis contemplated how to do so, Han Shuo was faced with his own dilemma. Given his and Wasir's strength, he could easily wipe Dennis and Massey out. However, Dennis, a Space Edict cultivator, was able to keep teleporting to avoid being surrounded by the 17 flying swords. Glacial Peak was a rather large place, and Dennis wouldn't remain at a fixed point for long, and short-distance teleportation didn't particularly drain his divine energy. As such, he wouldn't be able to capture him, let alone engage him in a proper fight. Had they been fighting in Pandemonium, Han Shuo had at least 7 tricks he could use to take advantage of the demonic formations within Pandemonium to alter the law of physics in the environment. That way, Dennis wouldn't easily be able to teleport around, making it much easier for Han Shuo to take him out. It was too bad the battle took place at Glacial Peak instead. There was simply no formation he could use. The constant frost that gathered there wasn't enough to freeze space itself, so Dennis was easily able to slip around. When Han Shuo noticed Dennis staring at the God Hunters from time to time, he knew what he was worried about. As such, he had to continue applying pressure on Dennis, with his 17 flying swords, even if he couldn't trap him with it, to prevent him from making a spatial fissure for his subordinates to escape. Han Shuo and Wasir kept the pressure high, not giving Dennis any chance to open a spatial fissure at all. One moment, he was up in the skies, and the other, he was down in the mountains, and the next, he was amongst his fighting comrades. Yet the two were unable to pin him down all the same. The fight between the 4 fell into a stalemate. One idea after another surfaced in Han Shuo's brain. His consciousness seemed like a vortex in the starry skies, spinning rapidly like a spiral. The ideas were all shot down by him. He had to sift through the countless ideas for one that could kill Dennis and Massey, for certain, to ensure they wouldn't be able to escape Glacial Peak. Perhaps as a result of all his contemplating, the 17 flying swords slowed down slightly, giving Dennis and Massey some time to take a breather. Dennis, as a cultivator of the Edict of Space, noticed the subtle change. Each time he teleported, the sword seemed to slow down a second or two, so he tried to teleport faster and faster. After tens of times of repetition, the swords now seemed much slower than before. It no longer seemed able to keep up with him. This should be enough time. Dennis immediately tapped into spatial energy, causing the fabric of space around him to ripple as he tore open a spatial fissure behind his subordinates. "Retreat now," Dennis yelled to his subordinates who were constantly backing off. He teleported to where his subordinates gathered with precise calculation. The god hunters that were being massacred by the subordinates of Wasier and HSS demon generals saw the spatial fissure behind them and leaped for the chance to escape. "No, Brian, stop them," Wasier cried as he charged towards them without regard for anything else. As if he had been awakened by Wasier's cry, Han Shuo, who had been standing completely still while chasing Massey and Dennis with his flying swords, suddenly seemed to notice something. He charged frantically towards Dennis and Massey. "Brian, Wasier, will return when we meet up with the other hegemons. By then, Pandemonium and Glacial Peak will be obliterated." "Ha ha ha ha," Dennis snickered as he grabbed Massey and fled towards the spatial fissure. All of a sudden, the 17 flying swords came charging in with a few times more force than before. At the same time, the demon generals swarmed back towards the myriad demon cauldron. Letting out a blinding, yet dark light, it came ramming towards Dennis and Massey with overpowering force. "Adios," Dennis said as he sped up even more, passing through the spatial fissure. Right as the two entered it, the 17 flying swords and myriad demon cauldron burst through the spatial fissure, causing it to emanate a kind of sparkling light. "Nuo!" Dennis's cry of agony came from within the fissure. His hand stretched out of the fissure as if he wanted to climb out of it, yet he was dragged back inside by a strong force. "Ag!" cried Massey and Dennis before the spatial fissure disappeared with a flash of light. It was now gone from Glacial Peak, along with Dennis, Massey, and hundreds of god hunters. Chapter 955, You Sure Are Treacherous. GDK 955, You Sure Are Treacherous. The 17 flying swords then proceeded to weave around the mountain, mercilessly slaughtering the few remaining god hunters. Soon they were all turned into chunks of flesh. The strands of grayish smoke, which then emerged from their bodies, were sucked into the cauldron of myriad demon hovering high in the sky. The sinister, dark radiance on it glistened brighter and brighter. Then, with a wave of his hand, the cauldron and the 17 flying swords whooshed back towards Han Shuo and vanished into his body. Wasier flew to Han Shuo's side and gazed at the region where iridescent radiances erupted and vanished. With a puzzled look, he asked Han Shuo, "Where are Dennis and the others? What exactly had happened?" Wasier could tell that Han Shuo must have done something to Dennis' spatial fissure. Otherwise, Dennis wouldn't have tried to crawl out from it and make that blood-curdling screech. Han Shuo put on a bright smile and explained, "I knew that Dennis wanted to escape with his followers using a spatial fissure, and so I allowed it to happen. Then, I secretly altered several key fulcrums of the spatial structure, effectively sabotaging his spacetime tunnel." Han Shuo had been racking his head on how to prevent Dennis from constructing a spacetime tunnel and escape while the battle was in a stalemate. He had thought hard about it, but it seemed impossible. But then, it finally hit him. Rather than preventing Dennis from constructing a spatial fissure, he might as well let him deploy it and use the spatial fissure against him. He deliberately slowed down his flying swords by fractions of a second to make Dennis mistakenly think that he was distracted, and to allow Dennis to construct his spatial fissure. The instant that Dennis tore the fabric of spacetime and constructed a spatial fissure, several demon generals made from high god souls stealthily moved into it and altered several points in the spacetime structure. Under normal circumstances, Dennis might be able to detect the minute alterations to his spacetime tunnel. However, with the great threats of Han Shuo and Wasier hurrying towards him, and especially when the 17 flying swords and cauldron of myriad demon went soaring at him, Dennis wasn't in the state of mind to notice the changes. He went into the spatial fissure without thinking. But as soon as he entered the tunnel, he discovered that his destination wasn't where he had intended, but an unstable temporal void. It was a desolate space billions of light years away without any elemental energies. Exotic matter sparkled and gave off strange radiances while consuming everything in its path like a black hole. Dennis immediately realized that he had fallen for Han Shuo's malicious scheme. But unfortunately for him, before he could crawl out from the spatial fissure, The 17 flying swords and the cauldron of myriad demons struck the fissure and caused it to collapse, cutting away his hope of ever escaping. After hearing the smiling Han Shuo explain what he had done, Wasier looked at him with terror in his eyes and asked, "So you have been scheming against him right from the start?" Han Shuo nodded and replied, "Well, he wanted to escape using a spatial tunnel, so I granted him his wish. He not only did make him dig his own grave, I've even made him jump into it happily. Isn't this wonderful?" Wasier was astounded. It took him a moment to regain his senses, and he remarked, "You sure are treacherous." Then, after taking a short pause, he put on a curious look as he asked, "And what will happen to Dennis and the others now?" "The temporal void will collapse. The implosion will be powerful enough to annihilate them instantly. Other than Dennis, who is in the over-god realm, it should be impossible for any of them to survive that kind of power." Han Shuo put on an even bigger smile and continued, "But Dennis should be heavily injured by the implosion and sucked into a corner of the universe. By my estimates, he would need tens of thousands of years to return to Elysium minimum." A shiver traveled down Wasier's spine. He took a moment to digest it before remarking, "Ruthless even." Han Shuo gladly accepted Wasier's praise and said nothing about it. He turned around and took a look at Wasier's followers, who were approaching them respectfully. He noticed that Wasier had suffered a considerable amount of losses, with hundreds of his followers perished. Some of his most loyal and valiant high god experts were killed with their bodies completely destroyed. "My apologies. I did not expect them to show up that soon," said Han Shuo in a low voice. Wasier immediately shook his head and replied, "It's not your fault. Neither did I expect that the woman who cultivates the Edict of Destiny would be so miraculous that she could predict my every move and even read my thoughts. But fortunately, she couldn't predict your arrival in time. Otherwise, I'm afraid that the glacial peak would have fallen by now. The Edict of Destiny is miraculous indeed. If Massey was in the realm of Overgod, she would be even more terrifying than she already was. It seems that of the 12 fundamental forces, the Edict of Destiny isn't just the most mysterious, but also the most formidable," remarked Han Shuo. While he was on his way to the glacial peak, he had a vague feeling that someone was probing his soul. Han Shuo was surprised by that feeling, and he immediately split up his consciousness into millions of strands and altered the state of his soul. With that, Massey was unable to predict his origin and arrival. Otherwise, Massey and Dennis would surely have tried to finish Wasier as quickly as possible and wait for him to arrive. By then, perhaps even Han Shuo would be powerless against the duo. "Greetings, Lord Brian," respectfully greeted Angelo, who was fortunate enough to survive the slaughter. Many of Wasier's followers also came to Han Shuo and bowed, thanking him for saving their lives. Han Shuo took a good look at the faces of all these people, nodded, and said to Wasier, "These men of yours are admirable, they are loyal and devoted. Speak nothing of what happened here today." Perhaps touched by the loyalty of his subordinates, Wasier's expression became unusually kind after scanning Angelo and the others. He warned, "And do not tell anyone that Brian was here. The war has only just begun. You bunch better stay vigilant." "Yes, my lord," answered Angelo and the gang. They were pleasantly surprised that their sovereign had secretly made an alliance with Han Shuo. Having witnessed Han Shuo's might firsthand, they became hopeful for their future. They felt that with an ally as powerful as Han Shuo, their chances of surviving the war would be much greater. "Wasier, come with me to the Pandemonium. I have been counting the days in Dhaka, and the others should have started attacking my base by now. I'm worried that my people cannot hold them off for too long. However, as long as we can get there in time, we can finish off the 3 hegemons just like we got rid of Dennis and Massey," proposed Han Shuo after seeing that Wasier was done giving his troops the relevant orders. "Sure," agreed Wasier straightforwardly. He took a short pause and added, "Wait one moment. I will bring my men along. The forces under Dhaka and the others are tremendous. I'm worried that you won't have enough men to handle them." Han Shuo shook his head and smilingly replied, "That won't be necessary. Just the 2 of us is more than enough. Dhaka and the others lost half of their army to me while on their way to the Pandemonium. My demon guards not only possess greater combat strength, but also outnumber their forces. If it wasn't for the presence of Dhaka, Dagmar, and Acer, I wouldn't even need to return to the Pandemonium. My House of Han guards could crush them easily. Wazir was astounded. He cried, "What? Half of their army killed before they entered Pandemonium?" Han Shu had sealed off all information on his side, while Daka and the others definitely wouldn't go around and tell everyone about their pathetic losses. Therefore, nobody knew about it even till now. "That is unbelievable," exclaimed Wazir before asking, "How many casualties did you suffer?" "0. Hee, I lost just 3 mountains and some energy crystals." This will take a while to explain. Come, I'll tell you everything in detail as we travel." After dropping an even bigger bombshell on Wazir, Han Shu departed and left the gaping Wazir. "My lord," Lord Brian had left, reminded Angelo when he saw that Wazir was still staring blankly into the air. It was only then that Wazir was roused from the shock. Desperate to know how Han Shu accomplished it, Wazir hastily gave Angelo and the others the last few instructions before quickly flying in Han Shu's direction to catch up to him, destroying half of the opponent's army without losing a single man. Such an extraordinary loss-exchange ratio was astounding even to a sovereign like Wazir. While Han Shu was busy slaughtering god hunters all over the glacial peak, Daka, Dagmar, Acer, and their god hunter finally came to the Pandemonium. Han Hao, Stratham, Andrina, and the others who were in an underground chamber could clearly see the god hunters stationed at the outer perimeter of the Pandemonium through an enormous spatial refraction mirror. After having suffered a round of crushing defeat, Daka and the others learned to be much more prudent in their approach. When they reached the outer perimeter of the Pandemonium, no one dared move forward recklessly. They stopped and took their time to carefully scan their environment down to every piece of rock. After losing half their men, Daka and the hegemons were frightened, and they no longer dared underestimate the House of Han's power. They truly considered the Pandemonium a most dangerous place that it was. They would be cautious in each step they take. With that, they took an hour to complete a journey that would have been minutes otherwise. Chapter 956, Far Too Fearful 956. Far too fearful Stratham, Gilbert, and the others snickered as they watched the god hunters halting after taking each step forward and being overly cautious. The previously tense atmosphere turned much more relaxed. At this pace, they will need another day before they will actually step into Pandemonium. Haha, these god hunters are really funny. "It's not like we have any formidable defensive measures at the outer perimeter," remarked Stratham as he chuckled. "They are terrified." Mike pointed at a group of god hunters in the spatial mirror and said, "Look carefully at this bunch. There are still wounds visible on their body, and their footsteps are rather disordered. Even their movements seemed awkward and unnatural. It is obvious that they were heavily injured from the last attack." The House of Han members had heard a thing or two about Daka's misfortune in the 3 mountains near Han Hao's base. They couldn't help but take quick glances at Han Hao and felt a sense of awe when they thought about how half of their opponent's army perished just like that. The one standing in the chamber with them was Han Hao's main body. His secondary soul that possessed his surrogate body had now rejoined his main soul and body. The current Han Hao was at his peak condition and stronger than he ever was. Although he was still no match against Daka or Acer, he had absolute confidence in defeating Dagmar, who was also a cultivator of the energy of death. "They wouldn't attack for at least another day. We don't have to be too worried for now," remarked Ballins after he calmly evaluated the god hunter's movement and distance. "Humph, I hope they will all die. These degenerates should be cleansed from the universe," shouted Andrina hatefully. For whatever reason, Andrina was extremely hostile towards god hunters. If there was a magical button that could somehow obliterate every god hunter in the world, she would smash it without any hesitation. She would get triggered if she heard anything remotely related to god hunters and would proclaim about eradicating them. Han Hao took a quick glance at Andrina and made a mental note to have his followers keep as far away as possible from the peculiar little girl. She knew just how terrifying Andrina was and that none of his followers was Andrina's match. Besides, Andrina was the daughter of the Destiny Goddess, a close friend of Han Shu's, and recently became Han Jin's lover. Even if Andrina murdered a couple of his followers in rage, there would be nothing that Han Hao could do. He also thought that he should talk to Han Jin to prevent his sister-in-law from killing his followers. "Let's get ready. It's time to activate all primary formations," said Bollins after taking a moment to assess the situation. Okay, answered the 5 elite zombies. They took a look at Han Hao and left the chamber. There were dozens of demonic formations of varying sizes around Pandemonium. Some of them would consume yuan energy at an astonishing rate even when idle, especially those demonic formations with extremely terrifying power. Although Pandemonium had collected a considerable amount of yuan during the past many years, it was not unlimited. Therefore, to save on their reserves of yuan, most of the demonic formations were deactivated until the last possible moment. Although the army of the Godhunter Alliance was now right outside their turf, and they would be attacking soon, they could still wait a little longer before activating the energy-guzzling formations. But considering that Han Shu was currently not around, the Pandemonians dare not take any chances. Han Hao left soon after the 5 elite zombies exited the room. Andrina thought for a moment before quietly catching up to Han Jin. During the recent days, Andrina was always seen with Han Jin. It was as though the two were inseparable. Not only were they attracted to each other, they seemed to be able to help each other advance their cultivations, as if they knew each other better than they understood themselves. Everyone, get ready. Order the House of Han guards to station in every region. We must utilize not only the power of the demonic formations, but also the power of our army. Daka, Dagmar, and Acer are all experts in the Overgod realm. Any of them are many times more powerful than the combined might of Hill and Shatio of Witherbone City. We must not let our guard down, ordered Bollins in a grave face after Han Hao and the others left. The House of Han members understood the gravity of the situation. They stopped their giggling and went back to work. Outside Pandemonium, Daka, Dagmar, and Acer were discussing on how they should attack Pandemonium. Dagmar proposed that they would bombard Pandemonium in a burst of energy to destroy all the boundaries and defenses. Daka thought that they should be more methodical. They should survey and probe the environment as much as possible before attempting an exploratory attack. And if it failed, they would inform other godhunters and call for backup. Acer, meanwhile, had an entirely different approach. He suggested that the 3 of them should explore Pandemonium by themselves. With their overgod power, no matter the trap laid, they should be able to easily escape. Their combined might should be more than enough to handle both Han Shu and Han Hao. The 3 each held on to their own views firmly. They were unable to reach a consensus. It was only until a full day of discussion that they finally agreed on testing the defenses of Pandemonium. They ordered all their remaining army to assemble right outside the thick fog that shrouded Pandemonium. Following the cue of the hegemons, the 3 groups of godhunters simultaneously launched ranged attacks towards the thick fog. Bursts of colorful energies were launched into the air. They followed a parabolic trail and fell into the thick fog. A deafening rumble sounded from behind the impregnable veil as brilliant radiances of all colors erupted. After a long while, the rumbles had subsided and the flashes died down, but the 3 hegemons did not get the result they wanted. In fact, they did not get anything. They heard no miserable shrieks and no House of Han members scuttling to escape the bombardment. They didn't even know if their attack had caused any damage or casualties. Dagmar, even you cannot sense any soul undulations? Asked Daka, astonished. By now, the immense hatred had vanished from Dagmar's eyes. He had temporarily set aside his thirst for vengeance. In a deep voice, he said, I can sense a force that's preventing my soul from sensing anything far beyond the thick fog. It's just like being blindfolded. My soul is unable to sense if there's any dead there. In fact, I can't even sense the slightest presence within. Acer's expression changed at hearing that. He immediately recalled their experience back at the 3 mountains. The situation is off. I'm afraid we've fallen for a trap once more. We must be extra careful under such uncertain circumstances. Let's go in to look, the 3 of us. Dagmar finally agreed to Acer's initial proposal after some hesitation. Daka had already talked to Tyre about this beforehand. He had intended to take advantage of the battle going on at the fringe to take control over the Godhunter Alliance. He had thought that with the combined strength of the 3, they would easily be able to destroy Pandemonium. Little did they know they would lose up to half of their men before they even get to engage the Pandemonians. It was because of that Daka no longer dared to gamble with his men's lives. for they were what he was counting on to maintain any semblance of power in the alliance. He didn't want to take any more risks now, but if he didn't even enter to check, all their attacks now would be a waste of energy. That was why he had no choice but to make his decision. Acer agreed with Daka and turned to Dagmar. "I'm sure the three of us won't have any trouble going in." At that moment, Daka suddenly felt some undulations coming from his space ring. He didn't make a sound and instead secretly used his soul to check the message left on the magical mirror. After a while, his face glowed with joy. "Come, let us check this place out for good. Ideally, we'll be able to destroy the defense's boundaries altogether. HMPH, I doubt Pandemonium is actually as formidable as it looks." "Why the sudden change of tone, Daka?" Dagmar asked, taken aback by the sudden change in attitude. "I received word from a credible source that Brian's not in Pandemonium right now." "Haha, it seems that he's gone to Glacial Peak. There's no way he'll be able to make it back that quick. We should destroy all he has built here and lay in wait for his return before wiping him out." Dagmar and Acer suddenly turned and looked at each other before asking Daka suspiciously, "Are you sure?" 100%, replied Daka confidently, but without explaining the source of his information. He put on a mischievous smirk and said, "Come, let's go." Daka then took the lead and stepped into the thick fog confidently and without any hesitation. Dagmar and Acer hesitated for a bit, but they decided to trust Daka and followed behind him. As soon as they entered the thick fog, they noticed that their senses were greatly affected. Not only were their visions heavily obstructed, even their divine souls could not extend far. "Everyone be careful, this is a perilous place. But as long as we three stick together, nothing should go wrong," said Daka, after his fellow hegemons also stepped into the fog. Daka heard no response even after waiting for a long while. Dagmar, "Acer, where are you? Why aren't you talking?" shouted the startled Daka. He heard nothing but the echoes of his own voice that were reverberating louder and louder as though they were amplified by something. Then, as though triggered by his voice, an unknown energy suddenly swarmed towards him. Chapter 957, Taking a Risk. GDK 957. Taking a risk. Daka had never expected that something like that would happen right after they stepped into the thick fog. After calling out a few times loudly, without receiving a response, he knew that something odd had happened to Dagmar and Acer. They wouldn't just vanish like that. He gave it some thought. The three of them weren't even that far apart. Their sudden disappearance caused Daka to be on even higher alert. He had intended to find the other two before proceeding any deeper. But before he could sweep the area with his consciousness to locate them, he noticed that he had been wrapped by a thick layer of seemingly benign smoke. It was as if he had fallen into a quagmire, constantly sinking and about to be submerged at any moment. His limbs felt thousands of times heavier than before. It took him more than 10 times the force to even raise his arm. As the smoke enveloped him, it entered his body through his pores. Not only did he feel much heavier, he also started to numb. The smoke definitely contained some form of toxin. Even so, it was not able to do any proper harm to him. Daka smirked as he caused the energy of destruction in his body to erupt from his body, annihilating the toxin that had entered it and forming a barrier over his body at the same time. All of a sudden, the weight of the smoke was suddenly lifted, giving him back control over his body. Being one of the 12 hegemons of the Overgod realm, Daka was famous for his combat strength. The Edict of Destruction had always been one that focused on powerful attacks, and Daka was willing to do anything to constantly get stronger. A minor setback like this wouldn't be able to overcome him. After breaking from the toxic smoke, he made a sweep with his soul in an attempt to locate Dagmar and Acer. However, his mastery over this was still inferior to Dagmar's. He felt his soul sense being restricted from spreading too far.